So, like a lot of you, I'm sure, I grew up with like an overactive imagination, right? To the point where it was, my mom called it Randyland. It was kind of, I was always off in this sort of make-believe world, and my whole life was just kind of this ongoing narrative that I made up, right, as I went along. I see some nodding heads. A lot of you are like that, right? I mean, it was super frustrating for my parents, right? But it was really nice for me. It was like this constant escape, right? There was actually, when I was probably like 10 years old, I went through like a spy phase where I had this, you guys know those blinds where you like pull the thing, and then it's got the little deal at the bottom that, you know, I had that next to my bed, and every night I would like check in and like report on my day and all the spy stuff that I did, you know. Anyway, so like my life was kind of like a, does this move? No, I feel like I should be doing stand-up if I'm holding it. Okay, all right. Anyway, so the point is, my childhood was more or less spent in fantasy, right? Not a whole lot of real-world acknowledgement on my part. And it actually got to the point where when I actually remember, hold on, before I get there, something that's interesting is I've discovered a lot of my memories growing up are actually fictional. I see more nodding heads, yeah. Okay, this is good. All right, so like I'll be thinking about something or talking about something, and my family will be like, that never happened. Like, what are you talking about? Or I'll remember something completely differently, right? Just because in my brain, things were different, right? There's fantasy and reality, right? And I just kind of lived more in the fantasy sort of realm, right? And I remember at an age older than I'll admit, I remember where I was when I found out I would never acquire superpowers. Yeah, it was devastating, right? I hear right? I mean, it sounds silly and dumb, right? But I was like heartbroken, and I was depressed for a long time. But then, you know, as you get older, you kind of let reality sort of penetrate your brain a little bit more, and you have to engage in stories on purpose, right? Instead of it just kind of being a natural sort of, this is how life is, right? And so I still, like, to this day, actually, sometimes if I'm getting out of bed, I'll like whip to the corner, like to pull myself up out of bed. Anyways, like, it's still, you know, storytelling and fantasy and stuff is still a big part of who I am, right? And a part of my life and how I experience the world and stuff. And we're going to talk, I mean, as the title suggests, about how stories carry power, right? And not just, sorry, I totally forgot about my note cards. I need to find my spot to make sure I don't skip anything. Okay. Oh, okay. So this is my wife, by the way. My lovely wife, right? And she's actually at times given me a hard time. So with certain experiences are more powerful, I think, when they come from a book or a film or music or whatever, right? And so I'll be talking to Christy, my wife, and I'll like be describing the character arc from one of my favorite stories or something, and I'll just start like, I can't continue because I'm crying, right? I get all emotional about it, and then she'll be like, honey, like, what is wrong with you? Like, you didn't cry at our wedding. You didn't cry when any of our kids were born. You know, like, there's something weird here. I'm like, the difference is, you know, those moments, like, real life isn't crafted to like build emotion to a certain point, to where it's not designed, right, to make you cry. Like, yeah, people cry. There are moments that are really powerful and stuff, but the thing about stories is they can make experiences more powerful, right? So stories resonate, right? There's a part of least for me, some of my most powerful experiences have been like reading or watching a movie or listening to music or experiencing art in some other way, because there's something about that crafted experience that resonates, right? Which is why I love what I do. I'm a character designer. I'm assuming all of you guys in here are into story, right? You're here, right? Hopefully it's on purpose. So you're all into storytelling, right? And so there's something really cool about being part of that process, right? I'm a character designer, and so the thing I love about my job is I'll get a script or I'll get a brief or whatever, and with a description of a character, and then I just get to kind of. The cool thing about character design, and this wasn't part of my plan, by the way. I hopefully don't go over time, but the cool thing about character design, my favorite part of it, is that people experience a story through the characters, right? And so being part of determining how people experience a story is why I love what I do. Right? And I think most people who are into art in any form, right, whether it's visual art or music or dance or whatever it is, there's this storytelling aspect to it, right? Stories, this is all just, I haven't even gotten to my talk yet, so I apologize, but this is all just to kind of say stories are powerful, right? They're a big part of who I am, and they've kind of shaped who I am, and this whole talk is kind of based on this idea that stories carry power, right? Power to like mold minds and shape wills and form us into who we are, right? So what I want to talk about specifically is, and this is where some of you might leave. So what I want to talk about specifically is how stories affect the way that we make like moral decisions, right? They affect your judgment and the way that you see the world and how you decide what's right or wrong, right? And this is something that I actually went on this huge research binge a few years ago because I was thinking about this, because everybody grows up, right? Everybody changes. Life evolves, and you have people that you kind of were super close to that then you start drifting apart, right? Everybody's experienced that, I assume. And I was getting kind of upset, right? Because I'm losing friends. I mean, not losing them, but we're different, right? Things are changing. And I went and, did the Facebook stalk thing to like see like what is going on in their life, like what's happening. And the thing that was interesting is like all these people that I had been like wondering about, like, are they okay? They're all into the same TV shows. And I was like, this is interesting, right? And so I just was curious, right? And I'm diving into all this research. It's not like Wikipedia research. Like this is like, I'm going to like these peer-reviewed journals and scientific studies and stuff to figure out, is there something about, or what is it about, TV shows or about books or whatever it is that changes people, right? And I think there are two things to think about with this discussion, right? There's content and there's narrative, right? So content's just the stuff, right? That's in a story, right? And there's this argument that's been raging for like decades about disturbing content in film and video games and all this stuff. You've all heard this, right? And we're not going to talk about it because everybody, I think, has kind of landed, on one side or the other of that argument, right? And while I do think there's stuff to talk about there and discuss there, we're going to skip it because everybody's heard it, right? So we're going to talk about narrative, which is different, right? Narrative provides context for the content, right? Lots of research has been done on, like the research on content has like been exhaustive almost, right? People have spent, millions of dollars and studied for hundreds of hours on, violence in video games and, disturbing content in kids media and adult media. Anyway, it's been going on for a long time, and it's been kind of divisive and different. You have some research that confirms disturbing content has an effect. It turns kids into psychopaths or whatever, right? Or there's other research that's like, no, actually, disturbing content is good, right? The world's a disturbing place. So, having disturbing content makes sense, and it actually helps people deal with it and all that stuff. So we're not going to go there. What I want to talk about is that the actual power in media is in the story, right? It's in like the experiences that you have with the characters and the story that actually affects who you are. And this is when I really needed my slideshow, because there's this really awesome article, and this is the title, right? Temporarily expanding the boundaries of the self, motivations for entering the story world, and implications for narrative effects. I didn't want to memorize that. And you can tell it's written by smart people because the title is just terrible, right? It's a terrible title, but it's an awesome article, okay? And they talk about, it's all these doctors, PhDs, and people studying communication, studying psychology and all this stuff that they do all these studies, write all these articles, and they come together and they write this really, really cool article about that tries to explain why we as people seem to love and seek out stories, right? Because it's a universal thing. Like, everybody loves stories, regardless of what kind of stories you're into, right? Some people, not everybody's into fantasy and stuff like I am, right? Some people are just into news. That counts. But everybody, it's a universal thing. And in this article, they talk about, everybody's heard that, storytelling, seeking out stories is about escape, right? It's a form of escape. It's a way to get out of yourself and experience something else. And the thing that's really interesting about this article is this idea of, there are a couple really interesting things. One of them is what they called the concept of the self, which basically the idea is that everybody has different versions of themselves that they are building and maintaining simultaneously, right? So one person is simultaneously a student and a professional and a friend and a father and all this stuff. And in your mind, you're constantly building that version of yourself and maintaining it and feeding it its needs and things, right? And sometimes those needs overlap, but sometimes they compete with each other. And sometimes what you need as a friend is completely different from what you need as, a dad or a mom or whatever, right? And and that's exhausting, right? Your brain is constantly, keeping track of all these different versions of who you are and what each of those versions of you need, and trying to get that for you, right? And it's exhausting to the point that it can cause serious psychological side effects, right? If you have too many versions of yourself going on, too much going on, too many things to maintain and build in your mind, it can cause some serious side effects, right? And so no wonder, right, that we need escape, right? You need a way to get away from that and experience being someone else for a while, right? Because there's this really cool quote. No matter how much freedom one feels, one is never free to be other than oneself. And a given personal and social identity is inherently confining, even when it is relatively comfortable. The personal social self may be tarnished, it may be gilded, but it remains something of a cage. Temporary release from the constraint of personal identity is so widely desired and pursued that it may be considered a fundamental need or desire. No matter who you are, whether you're, whether you're living in poverty and, your life is terrible, or if you're, your life is perfect, it's still limited, right? You're still limited to who you are and your experiences in your life. You're only able to explore and do things within that cage, right, as they call it. And so everybody, regardless of who you are, has to escape that and has to experience something outside of that. The thing that's really cool is this idea of expanded agency, where they talk about, so experiencing a story. Let's say we experience stories through characters, like we talked about, right? You get attached to a character and you're able to escape your life and take the life of this character, right? You're taking the place of this person or whatever in the story. And that experience allows your mind to take a break from maintaining your versions of yourself, because this story has just kind of given it one for free, right? It's like, okay, I can take a break and you can just do what this guy's doing, right? Which I thought was really interesting. And it's not just like a casual sort of experience, right? A lot of more research, like there's this article and there's some other researchers and stuff. I was going to bring all my sources for this stuff and totally forgot. But if you email me, I can get them to you. So when you experience a story, right, you're in the place of this character, and whatever the character does, whatever they experience, you experience, right? And to your brain, there's no difference between the character doing that and you doing it, right? You're having these same experiences. So, which is that's why stories are so powerful, right? You're able to kind of have ownership over them almost because you've experienced them. I don't know how many of you have had this experience, but it's like for me, it's like I love Harry Potter. I know not everybody does, so if you don't, just be quiet. I mean, millions of other people love Harry Potter, right? But I feel like my relationship with Harry is special, right? Right? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, I see more nods. It's like this experience you have that's way more intimate than it makes sense that it should be, right? And so I'm assuming some of you have had this experience where you're talking to somebody about like you see like this awesome show and you're talking to them about like, oh, I hated that. And you're just like, whoa, it's like this. It's like this, they stabbed you or something, right? It's this like personal attack almost, right? It's like they're attacking you because they're attacking this thing that you love, right? That's because that is actually, you've had those experiences, you've been this character, right? And so when they hate that character or hate that story, they hate you, it feels like, right? Because that's part of who you are. So when you experience this, I'm getting away. Okay. So part of how this works is there's this cool book with another cool title, right? Mirroring People, the Science of Empathy and How We Connect with Others. This neuroscientist, he talks about this really interesting thing called mirror neurons. Has anybody heard of these? So it's like these cells in your brain that promote empathy, basically. So you are able to, like just by watching someone, right? You see their expression, you see their, their sort of their demeanor and stuff. You can kind of feel what they're feeling, right? So when these neurons fire in your brain, say you're watching someone who's having a tough time, right? You see someone who's sad, you get sad. It's this, these neurons fire up in your brain and you feel whatever it is that you're seeing someone else feel, right? So it's interesting. So we feel some of the same pain, and there's this quote from the book where he's talking specifically about like emotionally charged scenes in film. He says, we have empathy for the fictional characters. We know how they're feeling because we literally experience the same feelings ourselves. I mean, not to the same degree, right? But this shouldn't be a surprise, right? people are just doing this. Like, yeah, we know this. All right, shut up, continue, or move on. This isn't surprising, right? We've all experienced this, where you connect to a person or a character, and you just feel for them, right? You can feel it. But the same sort of thing happens with, not just with emotion, but with actions, right? It's like with sports, for example. I'm sure you all know somebody who's super into sports, and let's say a player messes up in a game and they just freak out, right? They get mad at this person that they don't know, right? And they rant and rave about what they should have done differently, despite what's probably a huge gap in their skill levels. Right? Like, you should have done this, That's because a similar sort of thing happens when you're watching someone just do something, right? It feels like you're doing that thing. And so these people, I apologize if anybody in here is one of those people. I'm not really into sports. I like them, but I don't, watch them. But it's like when let's say you're watching a game, there's a similar sort of thing happens, because it's like a story that's happening, right? You've got this, let's say you're watching football, this player's got the ball and they like fumble it or something. And as someone who's in the audience, whoever's watching, it's like they've fumbled the ball, right? They're living through this player, and they want whatever it is that the player's looking for to happen, right? They want the touchdown or the field goal or the basket, whatever it is. And when it doesn't happen, it's frustrating, right? It's like this guy spoiled it for me, right? I was going to score this touchdown and he just blew it, because you're in there, right? You're experiencing it and expecting it. And so when they mess it up, it's like, well, you'd say a swear word or whatever. Similar sort of thing happens with video games, right? When you're playing a racing game, I don't think I've met a single person who doesn't like lean into the turns, right? Because it's just, you feel it, right? It's part of the experience. It becomes real. So how we've had lots of nods, right? Everybody seems to get what's going on here, right? There's this connection, right, between you and a story, but the question is now, how much does that actually affect you? Right? How much does it actually change you, or, affect your decision making or whatever? There's this really interesting study I found called Repeated Exposure to Narrative Content and the Salience of Moral Intuitions. You can tell again, right? Smart people did this, because I don't understand what they're talking about. Anyway, it's a really cool study where they had this college campus where they have two groups of students who they participated for college credit. And so these two groups, you have a test group and a control group, and both groups take this questionnaire that's designed to measure how important certain factors are when you're making moral decisions, when you're deciding if something's right or wrong, right? There are certain factors that, are important to everybody on a certain level, but it just kind of measures how important this is versus this, and so on. And so they have all the students take this questionnaire. And then they have one group of students watch a soap opera for, after class, once a week, they watch an episode of a soap opera, which everybody knows soap operas are dumb, right? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. They're not dumb. They're, there's merit to soap operas, I suppose. But anyway, people know they're ridiculous, right? I shouldn't have said dumb. I'm sorry. But they're ridiculous, right? Oh, my mother had my baby when she was having surgery with her, kidney transplant or whatever, right? It's ridiculous, right? It's not even remotely realistic, is what I'm getting at, right? Because people know they're ridiculous, right? And so anyway, these students, they watch an episode of a soap opera once a week for 8 weeks. They take in the entire first run of the show, and then the 9th week, a week later, the control group and the test group both take this questionnaire again. the one that determines what's important to you when you're deciding if something's right or wrong. And the group that watched the soap opera, like collectively, showed a shift in what was important to them to more closely match the culture of the soap opera, which is nuts, right? It's 8 episodes of a show, like spread out a week apart, but it still had a measurable effect on how these people made decisions, right? And they did the same thing with sitcoms and courtroom dramas and news media with the exact same results, right? That despite this just being a small thing that they did or watched or took in, it had a measurable impact on how they thought about things, right? Which to me, that just kind of blew my mind, right? Because I wouldn't think that watching, 20 minutes of someone discovering that their aunt is really their grandma or whatever would have that big of an impact, right? But anyway, that just kind of blew my mind. So the bottom line here, right, is that stories are powerful in a kind of a weird way, right? They affect how you think. They affect what is important to you and how you make decisions. And the reason for that is, right, we connect with characters, right? We're in a story and we are the character, right? Whatever decisions the character's making, it's like you're making those decisions too. And human nature is to justify your actions, right? So regardless of what the character's doing, if you like that character, you're gonna want them to be right? So whatever they're doing, to your mind, there is zero difference between them doing it and you doing it. And so you're justifying it. It's becoming, regardless of what it is, it's becoming good, right? I mean, there's a big difference between like a hero being a racist and a villain being a racist, right? If the villain is racist, that's going to just reaffirm the fact that racism is bad, right? Whereas it's the hero it's like the story is saying, yeah, this is right? And that's with basically any likable hero or likable character. It doesn't even have to be the main protagonist or anything. There's this other book. I don't have a slide for this one because I wasn't actually planning on talking about it. But there's this cool book where he talks about the degree in which a character's actions affect your decision making depends on how likable they are. Right? So if, let's say you've got Ryan Reynolds playing Deadpool, right? Super likable guy, right? Playing a super terrible person who likes to kill people and all that stuff. The more likable the person is, the more justifiable their actions become, right? And the more righteous or whatever they are, right? Whereas if you have a character that just you love to hate, everything they do is going to seem like something terrible, right? Everything is going to seem like a bad idea. And it gets more complicated when you have more complicated characters, right? I mean, you have Superman. Obviously, like you have 1940s Superman who's just like ridiculous and never makes a mistake, and everything he does is just amazing, right? And he gets a new superpower every comic book to get out of a different situation. But then you have, Batman, who is really a bad guy, right? If you think about it, he's this guy who just hates people, right? His parents are murdered, and so he's like, you know what? I hate every criminal, and I'm going to start going and beating them up. I'm going to wear a cape to try to scare him, or a mask to try to scare him, Everything he does is just mean. He's just a terrible guy, right? But everybody loves him, right? Because, you have sorry, I'm getting way off script here. But so you have these guys. This is a little bit of comic book history, in case you're wondering. So you have Superman, which is basically these white guys' version of what they wish they were, right? It's like, hey, I want to be this. I'm this perfect guy who can do anything, and never make a mistake. Everything I do is right. And then you have another couple guys that are like, you know what? I wish I was super rich and could do whatever I wanted, and could be with any woman I wanted, right? And so they come up with a Batman. Anyway, where was I going with this? I'm not sure. Anyway, point is, okay, this is where we're going. All right, so with anti-heroes, they have become super popular, right? You have these characters that are not entirely good, right? Not entirely bad. They're kind of somewhere in the middle, which people love because they seem more complicated, right? People are complicated. Nobody's totally good or totally bad. And so the idea of, a character not being entirely hero feels a little more like, I could get into this, right? But so this book, the one that I was talking about that I forgot the title of, talks about anti-heroes, and he talks about how with like morally complex, is how he puts it, morally complex characters are interesting because the way that most of them are likable, right? You think of Han Solo, you think of, Deadpool or whatever other anti-hero you can think of. And people love them because they're kind of, edgy, and they, like, I'm going to be kind of a good guy, but I'm not going to care or whatever, right? Anyway, and so people, there's always this, they always make things that are like morally questionable decisions, right? But so there's always this kind of nudge to think, okay, it's not that bad. Like, he killed the guy, but like, it's all right. He dissed his girlfriend or whatever. But you don't completely justify it, right? But there's always this sort of nudge, not to say that you guys are going to turn into murderers, for watching someone anyway. So there's always this sort of like little inclination to think it's okay, right? Which is reinforced if there are no consequences. Right, so if someone gets away with something, we're driving down here with somebody, and she was talking about Count of Monte Cristo, but she loves that book. And I had no idea how different the book is from the movies. Has anybody read it? So she's just talking about, like, I am familiar, I'm only familiar with Count of Monte Cristo because of the movies, right? There's this scene, I had a friend in high school who, he like rewound this one scene in Count of Monte Cristo over and over again, where he's like having a sword fight with a guy in the living room or whatever, and he like catches the sword, and the guy slices his hand. That's what I think of when I think of Monte Cristo, because I watched that scene like 50 million times because of my friend. Anyway, sorry. Point is, she was talking about the book and how in the book, the author portrays the Count of Monte Cristo as basically just like, it's just a revenge story. Like, there are no consequences, right? He goes and he like just ruins people's lives, and he's right. In the book, he's right. Like, these guys deserve it. They made these terrible mistakes, and so I'm like the hand of God, right? I am coming down, and I'm just gonna ruin them, and there are no consequences, right? He ends up being totally fine and like marrying a 17-year-old or something at the end of the book. And it's like, the whole book is just like, I'm doing all this terrible stuff to people, and I'm the good guy, right? So when there are, the point of all this is that when you have a character who makes morally questionable decisions and then there are no consequences, it just like doubly reinforces this idea that this is okay, right? They got away with it, so it's fine. Or society accepts this, so it's fine. Or, people don't care, so it's fine. So there are all these things that I think, for me, are important to be aware of now. Because, we have 4 kids, right? And so we really care about what they watch, especially after I went on this research binge. I know I'm like super terrified they're going to start watching soap operas and like making all kinds of questionable decisions. And something that drove me nuts is like so many these kids shows, the parents are the bad guy. And I'm like, what? I am not trying to ruin your life, right? I am not trying to keep you from happiness. I'm a good guy. I care, right? And so, anyway, for me, this has kind of become something that I think about a lot, and I'm always thinking about like what I'm watching or what I'm listening to or whatever. I'm like, what is this saying? Like, what is this teaching? And how am I being affected by it, right? But the thing I wanted to, the point I wanted to make today was that all of you in here, I'm assuming, are or would like to be storytellers, right, in some form. And I feel, and that's what I want to do, right? I want to make movies. I want to make series. I want to run my own studio and stuff. And so, when I think about this stuff, I think, okay, when you're, as a storyteller, you have, I think, more influence over people than just about anybody else, right? I mean, you could be a politician and affect like half of the population, right? The other half's not going to listen to you. Or you could be a storyteller if you really want to change the world, right? You can make something that resonates with people and just like promotes good, right? And that might sound cheesy or sappy or whatever, but I think you got Uncle Ben, right? With great power comes great responsibility. I feel that, right? After studying all this stuff, I feel like, you know what? I think a lot about what my stories are saying and how they're teaching things, right? I'll think about, okay, I want this story to be about like, accepting people for who they are, or, sticking by people or whatever it is, right? And then like make that a focus and try to avoid, saying anything or accidentally teaching anything that is not right, right? Anyway, thank you guys for like letting me kind of ramble and get off topic a bit. This is something I just would like to, I didn't want this to be like a preachy thing, right? I didn't want to like shove my moral beliefs onto anybody, right? But this is an idea, and this is like what's crazy is like I was doing all this research and all of it is one-sided. There's nothing that says the other thing, right? Everything is like, yeah, stories are a big deal and they totally affect how people think and how they act and stuff. And so I just wanted to kind of say, you guys have like all the power, right? Which is a really cool thing. Like stories are this really awesome, like a well-crafted story is like a beautiful thing on its own. But then you couple that with its ability to actually like change things, and it's like this, it just kind of is a mind-blowing sort of deal, right? So anyway, that's just something to think about. You don't have to take it serious if you don't want to. I won't be offended. But stories change the world. And so as storytellers, just, think about that. But anyway, that's all I got. Thank you.